I've been in the fitness industry for over 2 decades, and trust me, if I took off this little hat and you saw the grey hairs underneath my head, you would know that I'm not lying. Now, when it comes to my experience in the fitness industry, I have now built up a physique in which I'm pretty happy with. I look good with my kit off and indeed with my shirt on. And the reason why I'm so pleased is because fortunately, I've never gone down the route of TRT, hormones, steroids, or anything else, and I'm completely 110% natural, and I do feel like the physique gives that sort of illusion as well. It doesn't look too overbearing or overpowering, and it doesn't look like something which cannot be achieved naturally. However, I have made my fair share of mistakes when it comes to training, nutrition, and indeed lifestyle management that caused me to either spend so much time doing the completely wrong thing, put so much effort into the very thing which wasn't moving me forward, or end up spending a bunch of money on things that, again, I really didn't need. So if I was to wind back the clock and I was at the beginning of my fitness journey, either looking to strip body fat or build muscle, there are some things which I would do completely differently in order to save me the time, the effort, and the money that I spent on some things going about it the complete wrong way. And I want to share them with you so you can avoid the mistakes and the pitfalls which I made and actually just have a clear path to success. Boom, yes team. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sharif Lawton, CEO and founder of a coaching company called 23 Lean, whereby we focus, yes, on the 1 hour in which you might be in the gym for that day, but also more impactfully, the other 23 hours of the day, which really move the needle forward in terms of all things health and body composition. So going through things like nutrition, sleep and stress management, energy expenditure, where your food is actually coming from in different food sources, what you do on the weekends, what you do when you fall off track in terms of mindset and self-sabotage and emotional eating and holidays and alcohol and all the things in which most coaching companies leave you completely unattended and unsupported with. And that is why we get the results in which we do across the board with our guys and girls, typically in their 30s and indeed their 40s. But as I say, in this video, we're going to go through some of the mistakes in which I made back in the day trying to achieve Body Beautiful, and just it's quite cringy for me actually to look back on this because there are so many things which I just didn't have a clue about. But they say that you either win or you learn, and believe me, I had to do a lot of learning to get to the place where I am right now. So I think the first mistake, and the most embarrassing one probably, is honestly the amount of money in which I spent on supplementation, always hoping that I would find the next pill, potion or powder that would cause me to turn into Arnold Schwarzenegger overnight completely naturally, when the reality was there's very, very, very few things that are even going to be somewhat beneficial to your physique development, and I could probably list them out on one hand. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and do so. But believe me, I was taking BCAAs, glutamine, green tea extracts, curcumin, I was taking chromium, picolinate, I was taking like, the things in which I couldn't even pronounce. Honestly, you'd open my cupboard and it literally looked like I worked at Holland & Barrett or GNC. And again, it was because at the time, and again, I'm showing my age here, we didn't have science-based, evidence-based practice to go off. We literally just had Jay Cutler and Ronnie Coleman in Muscle Mags. And if they said, hey, take this supplement, then guess what I did? I went out and took that very supplement. And at the time, I was just a gym instructor, probably making, under a couple of grand per month, I would say, definitely. And I'll be spending my hard-earned wages on a bunch of pills, potions, and powders, which basically did nothing and just caused me to have probably expensive wee down the toilet. And I don't want you to fall for any of that nonsense. Now, thankfully in 2025, I do feel like people are a little bit more clued on and switched on to the fact that most things are going to be complete garbage if they are natural, and indeed you can take them legally, which again was always the route I wanted to go down. But if you're looking for maybe a 1% edge, once you've got everything dialed in and correct, you might want to be looking at things like creatine monohydrate. And just taking between 5 and 10 grams per day is going to be more than enough to saturate your cells to help you get that extra rep or two out in your training sessions and ultimately help your recovery, as well as some neurological benefits which are coming out from creatine monohydrate over the past few months. And it's one of the most tried, tested and true supplements out there. And I do actually believe that every man, woman and child should probably be taking creatine monohydrate. Secondarily to that, especially if you live in the UK, I would say vitamin D3 plus K2, and that's just because we don't get enough sunlight, and it is a fantastic hormone in order to facilitate a lot of the body's functions, especially for guys, and testosterone production. Me basically supplementing my vitamin D3 and getting optimal levels back to where they should be was a game changer just in terms of my mood, my health, and my just general well-being. Then you might want to do something like a fish oil if you're not eating enough oily fish per week. We know that the EPA and the DHA are very, very beneficial again for cognition. There is some benefits to body composition, but for overall health and indeed your cardiovascular health, as like I say, as well as your brain health, fish oil is pretty unmatched. Unless you're doing a bunch of fatty fish multiple times per week, then you might want to look into supplementing with 2 to 3 grams of EPA, DHA every single day. And then lastly, you might want to look at caffeine as a supplement, maybe before you work out, just to give you that energy boost. It's got some hunger blunting benefits as well in case you are in a calorie deficit and you're trying to manage things like that. But honestly, above and beyond those 4 or 5 things, you are wasting your money and it'll be better spent on whole food. Now, the other thing in which I would change immediately if I could go back in time and stop wasting a bunch of it when it comes to my training would be the fact that I would stop the crazy 3-hour-long sessions doing all the reps, all the sets, all the exercises, thinking that more was better. And yes, when you're in your 20s, number one, you've got fantastic recoverability capacities. You can just recover from things so much faster. And as well, I had more time. There was no missus, there was no kid, there was no business really. And ultimately, I just had all the free time in the world to train. Now, that is not my reality right now. I barely get 3 times a week, 45 minutes a go to really get myself under that bar. And I'm sure you're in the same position. But the good news for us is that even if you did and had the ability to train that much, you are literally doing yourself a disservice because there is a concept called junk volume, which I'm going to explain to you right now. And that is basically the point of diminished returns, whereby I want you to think of your training as almost like a bell-shaped curve, whereby we're getting benefit, we're getting benefit, we're getting benefit, and then it kind of starts to peter off a little bit. So it really is now a case of quality versus quantity. It's not a case of you can just go in there and do loads and loads of training volume for hours on end and expect to see results. You actually have to be training purposeful, be training hard, and practically speaking, that typically looks like training each and every muscle group a couple of times per week, and over the course of a 7-day period, doing something like between 10 and 20 sets on the high end per muscle group to make sure that you're stimulating it adequately, but you're not doing so much that you're getting into junk volume territory and we're actually starting to regress. Because don't forget, all the adaptations you actually want with your physique happens when you're in the gym or when you're outside. Well, it's when you're outside. So we want to take Lee Haney's advice, an old school bodybuilder from back in the day, and he would always say, I want you to stimulate, not annihilate. So get in there, get the job done. 3 full body workouts at 45 minutes a piece to an hour tops is more than adequate to get you the body in which you need. And you can forget thinking that you have to do these marathon sessions, because a lot of what you're doing then is wasting your time, you're wasting your energy, and you're just getting hot and sweaty for the sake of it, but not really moving the needle when it comes to your physique development. And whilst we're on the topic of training and working out, the other thing in which I would do differently is make sure that I was to take a pen and paper with me to the gym. Now, why would I want to do that? Because the fact of the matter is, hypertrophy training, or training for muscle growth in particular, needs you to present an adaptation to the body which it currently hasn't had to deal with just yet. And what I mean by that is, it's not good enough to just turn up and go to the gym, and showing up isn't just half the battle despite what your favorite fitness influencer is saying. You actually have to go in there and provide a progressive overload stimulus to your muscle tissue in order to get it to adapt and to change. And if you're not doing that, then what tends to happen is you just go by feeling. And it's very easy to feel like you've been hit by a bus during your training sessions, but actually not have provided any sort of stimulus to that muscle in order for it to change and adapt. For example, if we are not lifting heavier weights over time, if we are not adding reps over time, if we are not improving on mind-muscle connection, then I guarantee you we're not going to be growing new muscle tissue. Even if you come up there sweating, your Apple Watch is telling you had a great workout and burnt loads of calories, I was focused on the complete wrong metrics that never brought me the results in which I wanted to. So tangibly saying, and it's a progression scheme which I give my guys and gals inside 23 Lean to be like, right, this is the progression scheme I want you to now follow, so that you know exactly the right moment across your training cycle of when to add reps, when to add load, when to add sets, when to change exercise, to make sure that we are actually providing a stimulus to that growth and we're not just ticking the box of getting in the gym. There's a massive difference between exercising, getting all hot and sweaty, and training for a very specific outcome. And I recommend that you go down the training route if you want to look a certain way. Cool, so now the supplements are out the way, the training's out the way, let's move on to nutrition. And again, I kind of don't blame my younger self because the knowledge and the evidence-based practice simply wasn't there at the time. And again, all we heard was there was clean food and dirty food. There was foods in which you could eat, there was foods in which you now couldn't, because inherently they would make you fattening. And this level of thinking bled down into so many other incorrect beliefs in which I had about nutrition, just based on what other bigger and leaner people were telling me to be true. And then I thought of realized that, okay, cool, they must be correct, even though they literally were talking out their ass and had no idea what they were saying. So for instance, I truly in my heart of heart believe that after 6 p.m. you cannot eat carbohydrates. The magical carb fairy would come out of the sheets after 6 p.m. and just make any carbohydrate in which you ate after that point just immediately turn you into Jabba the Hutt and just get you really, really fat and sloppy. And therefore I never did that. When the reality is we know that metabolism doesn't just switch off, and it's more about what you're doing over the course of a 24-hour period versus what you're doing over, just a very small and acute time period, which is going to determine, are you going to gain weight? Are you going to lose weight? And as it goes, there's nothing inherently fattening about carbohydrates, especially after 6 p.m. The other thing I believed was that, again, there was clean and dirty foods. There were foods in which you could eat as much as you want because they were not capable of adding body fat to you, and they were just capable of, adding slabs of muscle tissue. And there was foods in which you couldn't even eat a tiny quantity of because immediately, even a sniff of them would make you put on body fat. And again, we know that this is simply not true, and it's what you do with your overall calories and macronutrients, again, over the course of a 24-hour period, over the course of a 7-day period, which is going to dictate whether you lose weight, gain weight, or keep weight stable. And then when it came to protein, believe me, I took the idea of a high protein diet to the extreme. I'm talking a guy weighing roughly 80 kilos at the time, between 250 and 300 grams of protein. And again, just because Kai Green or Jay Cutler or someone told me to take that in the muscle mags. And do you know how many eggs that is per day? Do you know how much chicken breast, steak, tuna, fish? And again, because these were all clean sources of food and I wasn't having any sauces with them, any condiments, any seasoning, it's an absolute chore to get that sort of protein down you every single day, just because, again, I heard that some protein is good, more must be better, when the reality is if you're shooting for roughly a gram of protein per pound of goal weight, then you're going to be absolutely fine. So if I weigh, for example, 180 pounds right now, my goal is 170, I'm going to eat roughly 170 grams of protein per day, which is far more manageable than 300 grams, which I'm just stuffing in turkey breast at that point, and life is pretty damn miserable. And now we've gone through supplementation, we've gone through some training bits, we've gone through some nutrition bits. Let's go through some mindset bits, because I remember being really impatient with the process. If I was losing a pound per week because I was in a fat loss phase, I wanted it to be 2. If I couldn't see my biceps physically get bigger in the mirror, I'll be questioning the whole process. I'll probably program hop, and that's again a great way to literally get absolutely no results because you're not really providing that stimulus and that consistency needed to grow. So what I want you to realize is that even with the best setup in the world, fat loss is probably going to happen at 1 to 2 pounds per week tops, depending on how heavy you are and how aggressive you want to be. And muscle gain is going to happen far slower than that. I'm talking at roughly 1% of body weight per month on the top end. And that weight increase isn't all going to be lean tissue anyway. There is going to be some body fat associated with that as well. But just know those are the timeframes you are working with if indeed you're going to go down the route in which I did, of keeping everything natural, everything clean, no special supplements, shall we say, because ultimately this takes time. And there's only a certain amount of muscle tissue in which your body will generate per X amount of time. So you force feeding yourself, you doing a bunch more training in the gym than necessary, or you trying to just force the process is only going to make things harder. And it's a great way to end up either injured or too high in body fat, which basically I did both. So listen, I hope this was a helpful insight just to kind of hear about the trials, the tribulations, the mistakes in which I made back in the day, ultimately so you don't have to. Hopefully you've had a bit of a laugh about it as well. And hopefully you've gone, wow, I can't believe you did that. That's ridiculous. And that says to me that you're now on the right track and not the track in which I was down years ago. But unfortunately, I am quite close to what's going on right now in fitness on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, etc. And there is still a lot of rubbish out there because information is now so accessible. So what I would say is when you are listening to someone on social media about something as important as your health, your fitness, your physique, the way you look, the way you feel, make sure that person has done their due diligence in terms of time spent in the industry. Make sure they've now got a roster, a laundry list of clients who you can now see yourself in, so you can be like, okay, cool, cool, this guy can't just get himself into shape, but he can get a bunch of other people into shape from different walks of life. Because for me, that's very, very important to acknowledge that just because you've got a good physique doesn't necessarily mean that you know what you're talking about. And again, that's another trap in which I fell into. So team, I'm gonna love you and leave you right now. 23 Lean version 2 is gonna be out soon, and I'm gonna be taking on 10 individuals looking to absolutely smash their physique, their confidence, their health, their muscle mass, and indeed their levels of body fat percentage over the course of the next few months going into 2026 to look and feel their very best. If you think that might be you, if you like the vibe, if you want to inquire more about what we do, who we help, and how we can potentially get you on the right foot, especially if you want to basically shortcut the process, just go ahead and DM me the word 3 on my Instagram channel below, and I'll explain more about how we can get you going once I know that I'm going to be a good fit for you and indeed I can help. So I will see you in that next video. Shoot me a message on Instagram if you want to go back and forth, and other than that team, I will see you very soon in a bit.